I'm Tom Mennier, and you're listening to CVS Podcast. This is the second 5-part series in which Tom and David continue their discussions on matters of theological and cultural concern. A two-way Q&A Series 2, Part 2. Questions on scientism, Satan, and the transcendental good. We live in a materialistic age, what they call a post-truth and postmodern age. Science is now considered the final arbiter of truth, but postmodernism is increasingly politicizing science to serve the agenda of the powerful. This is how I see it. Where do you see it all heading, and how would you address this problem?
Well, God is everywhere. God's Spirit fills all things, and in a special way, by the grace of God, we can have the Holy Spirit, the Holy Trinity, come and dwell in us when we convert to Christianity. But even before our conversion to Christianity, I was talking about the merits of Socrates. He had wisdom. He had a certain love of God, a certain naive intuition that guided him. There's a spark of the divine, if you want to use a Kabbalistic New Age notion. It's real. We are part of God's plan. And no one wants to believe a lie. This is what St. Augustine said. So this is a very humbling fact that no one wants to believe a lie. So what does that mean? That means basically they love the truth conditionally and relatively and subjectively. It's not perfect. But at least they themselves don't want to be lied to. They may value Machiavellian techniques of lying and manipulation, and it's just like the ends justify the means for these people because they don't have God. Okay, they can do evil so that good may come according to their calculation. But at least they themselves don't want to be lied to. So there is a built-in basic love of truth. Like I said, it's limited, it's relative, it's subjective, but at least it's there. That's why we never need to worry about the next generation being so brainwashed that the blinders are on, they're completely chained to that cave wall, watching the shadow dances, and they're buying it 100%. It may look like that to us because we're cynical old bastards, but if we remember the divine spark that's in them and their love of truth that they have, that imperfect love of truth that they have, no matter how far gone they may seem to be, then we'll always have hope for humanity, because it just takes a little bit of introspection, a little bit of meditation, a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of grace, and grace builds upon grace. So this is as optimistic as I'll ever get when I'm talking in the abstract here. I'm not minimizing the problems and the power of the slavery that Satan has us in. But it's a battle, and as you and I always discuss, it's an individual battle first and foremost. It's an individual battle, introspection. The enemy is the inner me, and there is hope. And to foster that, to nurture that, of course, we need examples. That's why we have the saints. That's why we have a promotion of wholesome things like the family and proper understanding of sexuality and intimacy and these sorts of things. And it's all to foster that organic growth of the individual. So that's what I would say.
Yeah, I didn't want to sound too cynical in that question, but I think that you're absolutely right when you say that none of us want to be lied to. But when I try to, I'm always struggling with communication, how best to communicate to a given audience or a given person. So if I say, we have saints and the Word of God to guide us to someone like my devout atheist friend, I'll call him, that won't work. But what I could tell him is that, because they're big on science, there is now scientific proof, or let's say very strong evidence, that we are biologically hardwired for the truth, because we can actually measure cognitive dissonance and indicators biologically of emotional distress when we are told something false, or we are asked to give a false answer to a question. There are actual biological reactions that don't look harmonious anymore. Something is disturbed when we lie or are told a lie. So we are hardwired for the truth. Why do we fall away from the truth? Well, this is where the whole lesson that we're supposed to learn from the Catholic view of Satan is that he is described as the father of lies, the master deceiver. Just because we're hardwired for the truth by no means or any stretch of the imagination means that we won't fall away from truth. We will be deceived. And the problem with deception is that it sort of builds on itself. The longer we stay stuck in a certain deception, then more deceptions will be attracted to it, like a snowballing effect, to protect the initial deception, especially if our actions and our investments and our associations and our habits of thought have become so entrenched by the first deception and so on. And this leads to any number of neurotic symptoms coming from the natural cognitive dissonance from such a state of mind. So once you go down that road, it's hard to climb back out. So this is how the satanic principle operates. And this is where I see it heading, where people are buying the propaganda line, follow the science, not fully cognizant of the fact that the true meaning of that is follow the scientists, meaning follow the priesthood and obey the priesthood, because little old me, I was never trained in science, and they'll say to you or me, Dave or Tom, who are you? Do you have a science degree? You didn't even study science. You don't know anything about science. What do you know? And this kind of appeal to authority, which is built into the modern discourse, people are appealing to authority all the time. Have they forgotten that this is one of the main logical fallacies? No, you do not have to be a microbiologist. No, you do not have to be a virologist or an astrophysician or whatever it is. You don't have to be these things, but you do. It is your responsibility, at least as an adult, to know the principles of science, to understand the meaning and purpose of the ethics of the Nuremberg Code. These are things that a human being with two brain cells to rub together can understand and must understand. And it's very easy to detect when authorities breach those codes of ethics and those principles of science.
The other thing I wanted to add was a little trick. When you're confronted with a false principle, relativism, subjectivism, postmodern thinking, you have your truth and I have my truth, and there are no absolute truths and these sorts of things. You apply that teaching, that false teaching, to itself. So there are no absolute truths. Is that an absolute truth? If not, I can dismiss it. You know, it's the same thing with any false attitude. Turn it on itself, see how it holds up. And you'll end up being a monotheist, and from there, the rest is history.
Well said.
Good little trick.
Yeah, absolutely.
Satan is ontologically good, but not morally good. Can we humans reject any aspects of the good, or must we always strive to embrace and embody them all?
I would say embody them all. It cuts to the bone here of what goes wrong with the fallen human. And that is, it begins with a small error. It usually begins with a simple decision, like Adam and Eve. Eve listening to the serpent and biting that apple was a very simple decision that happened in a second and changed the whole course of human history. Satan fell because of his pride, and he wanted to usurp God. He wanted to be as God. And this is the lesson, this is the trick, the error that he tried to implant in humankind. So the necessity of rooting out stock, root, and barrel and branch, or whatever the saying is, of every flaw, every sin in you. This is what we are called to do as Christians. That's the difference between the left and right. The left are trying to perfect you. They're trying to perfect the world. And they spend very little time on self-reflection. Probably none, because all their energy is directed externally and outside of them. So we have to believe in we have to meditate on the ideal heavenly goodness. We have to meditate as a habit on the eternal realm and the vision of the perfect oneness, beauty, truth, and goodness of God and the heavenly realm. That is our example. We can't leave any of it out. And your personal responsibility is under God, and that's who you answer to.
A couple of things to add. There's the principle of the integral good in Catholic theology, which says that all of the components have to be there for a good act to be meritorious. You can't be lacking any of them, and I can't name them off the top of my head. There's also the idea which Jesus mentioned, which is that if you violate one iota of the law, you violated the whole law. If you break one commandment, you've broken all the commandments. So there's this false mercy that's going around, not only without the church, but within the church, that is good enough. We can overlook this and that and the other thing, whereas the standard is actually much higher. But then there's the other side of the coin, which you mentioned, which is emphasized by all of the saints. All of the saints say what you said. Be stern and strict and harsh with yourself, and gentle and merciful with the other, and treat everyone as your superior. Never think yourself superior to anyone. I feel superior to many people, most people. I also have an intellect which I submit to the church, and the church says I'm not allowed to think that I'm superior to anyone. But I'm allowed to feel that way, but I just can't give those feelings undue credence.
That's right.
So I have to submit my intellect, and my intellect will inform my will, and my will is what makes the choices.
Right. That's right.
And so then I will be able to grow in virtue because I've submitted my intellect, and that informs my will, and I become a Christian.
There you
through
go.
action, through loving my neighbor,
That's it.
and through being merciful and not being judgmental, and not acting on the feeling I have that person's an idiot. Why? Because they don't see things the way I see them, which is my natural inclination.
Which is a natural inclination across the board, everywhere.
I'm not the only one.
You're not the only one. You're only human. No, I'm just joking. Because this is how the liberals of today and so on are extremely harsh and judgmental to others while they're proclaiming this kind of world-saving doctrine. There's a saying that comes to mind: I'd much rather be a hypocrite than a heretic. This is a response, by the way, to the very, very boilerplate complaint of atheists and so on, and critics of Christianity, calling us Christians hypocrites and stuff like this, because we're guilty of all the sins they are, and who do you think you are? So his answer was, I'd much rather be a hypocrite than a heretic, because a hypocrite knows the law but fails to live up to it, whereas a heretic changes the law according to how they live.
Is it Longnecker?
It was Longnecker, that's it. I heard that quote once, like 12 years ago, and I've never forgotten, and I bring it up quite often, because that is the whole point. It relates to what you were saying. It's like, we have these tendencies and we have these feelings, but then we have the discipline and the standards set for us by the fathers of the church and the apostles and Jesus Christ and himself. The examples are all there, and the law is set very clearly to hold ourselves to. At least we know the law, and we have something to strive for, and we have things to correct in ourselves. Whereas the non-believer and the worldly person is being shifted to and fro by the philosophies of men, as it said in, I think, Timothy.
I believe it was St. Monica who said, when you see someone's in error, with respect to God or religion,
Mm-hmm.
rather than having a serious talk with that person about God, the better approach is to have a serious talk with God about that person. It protects the dignity of that person.
Yes.
It avoids confrontation. This is not to say that we never correct, because there is a time and a place to correct our fellow
Yes.
humans.
Yeah.
It's as a default go-to reaction.
Mm-hmm.
If we can get in the habit of communicating with God,
Mm-hmm.
instead of thinking that we are God, am I the vicar of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
and am I going to use my God-given infallible authority to cast judgment on you and excommunicate you and to correct you and to set the bar and you have to meet my standards and so on and so forth? Or is it not more humble to go to God on my knees
Yeah.
and express my love for you?
Yeah.
And you're lost in this way, it seems to me. And you might be surprised the answer you get back.
Yeah.
That in His mysterious wisdom, there's a reason why this thorn is in your side or in his side or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's a different approach. It's a more humble approach.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.